Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. And a very warm welcome to Sunday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. Today we're looking back at Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice, which was released in 2016, directed by Zack Snyder and written by Chris Terrio, based on an original screenplay by David S. Goyer. This film is a very interesting moment in CBM history, in comic book movie history. It's a very niche movie, and Man of Steel, the film that this is a sequel of, was a niche movie as well. It's a very unique way at making a superhero movie. And when you go into this movie, you start to realize as soon as it opens, even with the Warner Brothers logo, and that music, that gentle, somber piano music by Junkie XL and Hans Zimmer, you know this movie was missold in the marketing. The title Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice comes up with very little letters. You're expecting bold letters. You're expecting this to be a WWF grudge match. That isn't what this film was, but it was how it was sold. And this is why we went from a huge, record-breaking opening weekend global box office to one of the biggest drop-offs in movie history. Because WB was selling this movie to the WWF WrestleMania crowd. So this film should have been sold to the kind of people who love Denis Villeneuve's Dune, who love the Blade Runner sequel, who love The Batman by Matt Reeves, who love the Dark Knight trilogy, kind of people who support auteurs. If this happened, if this film was sold within its trailers, TV spots and marketing properly, it would have attracted these kind of people and this type of audience. Now, admittedly, if they didn't sell it as a WWF brawl, it would never have made the record-breaking opening weekend money it did, but it also wouldn't have dropped so hard. Clearly, probably, Batman vs Superman wouldn't have made as much money if they were honest about the movie. But the less money it made wouldn't have been the end of the world. The problem is Zack Snyder was making a niche movie, but the studio wanted him to make a movie for the general audience. They wasn't happy with the Man of Steel box office, so they were going after hardcore MCU Avengers money. But you've got the director doing one thing, doing what's right for him and his vision, and you want the studio just to make money and chase after that Marvel Studios brand. So you've got the wrong person for the job. But that doesn't change the fact that, in my opinion, Batman vs Superman is a niche movie. And if you sold it to the niche crowd, you wouldn't have had the toxicity surrounding the movie. The reason this movie had a toxic reaction, and the conversations and discourse around it were very, very toxic and very passionate. You either love the movie or you hate the movie. But it was because it was sold to the people who hate the movie, it was missold to them. It was never meant for you. This was never meant to be an MCU buddy-buddy comedy with Batman and Superman. To me, Batman vs Superman is a Superman movie where Batman happens to be the villain. He starts off being a villain, and a fallen hero, if you like. He's lost Robin, aka Dick Grayson. He's been around. He says to Alfred that villains are like weeds, criminals are like weeds. You basically pick one and another one grows in its place, or however he says it. I can't remember the exact quote or the line of dialogue. So he's very bitter, he's very cynical, and he's angry at this point. And the Battle of Metropolis just takes his anger over the edge. He's becoming a criminal. He's a torturer. He's torturing villains. But to Batman, he's still the villain of this. Let me say that again. But in terms of Batman's point of view, he is the hero of this story. He doesn't think he's the villain. But in fact, Bruce has become psychotic in this movie. And Superman sees what he's doing, and it disgusts Clark to his very core. This is not what Clark was raised to believe. This is, everyone deserves, to be tried in court, to be innocent till proven guilty. That's why Superman normally doesn't kill. I know he killed Zod in Man of Steel, but he did, within the story and the narrative, he didn't have a choice. He doesn't believe in killing people. But Batman vs Superman is a very interesting movie, because if it did attract that Logan audience, that Matt Reeves, the Batman audience, that Todd Phillips, the Joker audience, the Denis Villeneuve audience, that auteur type of audience, it would have had a much more positive reception by critics, but especially the consumer, the customer, and the fans. The wrong fans were sent to watch the wrong movie. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Personally, I love Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice. But when I'm sitting there and the movie opens, because the first time I saw this movie was the original theatrical cut, I got to see it early. But I'm thinking to myself, this isn't the movie we were sold. I'm thinking, wow, this is different, not bad different. I start to get more intrigued as the movie goes along. I'm very interested, and I'm excited because I don't know what's going to happen in this movie. And all of a sudden, everything I was sold was a lie. Yes, all the sequences are in the movie that they advertised mostly, but it was, the trailers re-edited things to make it look like, as I say, a WWF SummerSlam romp, which is not what this movie is. This is a carefully thought out movie with plenty of commentary. And the whole idea of this film is that Batman's old, bitter, cynical, and angry, and Superman's this brand new hero. And he was brought up in a different background. He's not bitter, he's not angry, he's not twisted. But Superman gets involved in his own problems within this movie, and some people start to view him as a villain and a criminal, especially Bruce Wayne. And it all happens at the beginning of the movie in the desert, wherever that desert's supposed to be. It's a brilliant thing that Lex Luthor has manipulated to make Superman look bad. And it's really great because you get that brilliant moment where this guy's holding Lois Lane hostage and threatens to kill her, and Superman's just looking at him, kind of smiling in a way and thinking, "Now, mate, you don't threaten my girl." And he just, woof! I love the way Snyder directs that bit, where Superman just looks and he just slams him through the fucking wall. It's so amazing, and I love it. Some people are a bit upset because they think Superman probably killed that guy by doing that. He probably did. I don't really care. At this point, I'm past the conversations whether Superman should kill or not. In this universe, the rules are different, because this universe should have been an Elseworld universe. This shouldn't have been pure, the Blue Boy Scout Superman franchise for general audiences. This should have been an R-rated Elseworld universe for Zack Snyder to do his thing. But WB, as I say, wanted to chase this Marvel Studios audience. But DC have been at their best when they chase the auteur audience, whether that's Batman 89, The Batman, Joker, the Dark Knight trilogy. They're at their best with DC when WB allowed a director to do their thing. But with BVS, they were interfering. Not as much as they would interfere with Justice League, but as I say, you've got a director who's an auteur, then you've got, this studio who just want to make a lot of money. And that is the problem that was started off by Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios, where you're not making films for the love of the art. Because I think if you make content for the love of the art and you make the best thing that you can through your talent and your visionary quality, you're bringing the money automatically. Where these studios now have a different mentality. They're reading Twitter. Oh, don't do this, do that. Oh my God, someone on Twitter just said that. Oh, change that. This is why they do so many reshoots. It's a mess. So, like, originally, there was a director, there was a writer or a writer-director. They had a vision, they did their casting, and you got great results. More often than not, in the old Hollywood system, you got great results. With all the talks of the patriarchy, well, let me tell you this. The patriarchy ran entertainment better than the extremists are running it now. The Hollywood apocalypse and entertainment industry apocalypse started around 2015, 2016, just after the release of Batman vs. Superman. So that movie's release is very interesting. It's taken them about 6-7 years to bankrupt their own industry via their extremism. And it makes me very, very happy that this has happened. I love the medium of entertainment, film and television. But this is karma, everyone. And the treatment of Zack Snyder in this movie is part of that karma. So Batman, to me, is a villain in this movie. But then you've got Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. Now, there's a lot of opinions about Jesse's performance as Lex Luthor. I've said it a billion times. When I first heard the casting, I was like, ugh. But then I thought, this is Jesse. He's one of the best indie actors of our generation. There's no question about that. Have you seen him in The Double? What a fucking movie that is. But he's a great actor all round. The Social Network, he's the fucking energy of that film. I wouldn't have chose him as Lex, but ultimately, I really enjoyed his new 52 Lex Luthor. The hatred and jealousy he has for Superman. He sees Superman as this 6-foot god and has everything handed to him that he never had. Because basically, as Lex Luthor describes it on the roof near the end of the movie, no God came to save me from daddy's abominations, and abuse that he got. He's taking his frustrations not just out on God, but on Superman, that is a substitute of a god to Lex Luthor. This is the type of hatred we've seen in some of the comics, by the way. And this is a similar hatred we saw for Superman from Lex in Superman, the animated series sometimes as well. So it's very interesting because basically peak Lex Luthor has always had this deep hatred for Superman. Now in Smallville, it's very, very different. Now it's similar to the comics in Smallville where ultimately when we get to the later seasons and how, Clark and Lex face off in that final moment in the fortress, is that Lex sees him as a threat, but as he says to him, I love you like a brother, but he sees him as a threat, so he decides to stay in the fortress as it crumbles with Clark. Lex is willing to die with his friend. Ultimately, in Smallville, they're frenemies. But in the comics, it was always Lex having this deep hatred of Superman. And to Zack's credit, and to Terrio's credit, they take that on. So in that element, Lex Luthor, Jesse Eisenberg, looks nothing like Lex Luthor, but he does act like Lex Luthor in certain ways. Now some people, look, my tails curl up and I start to raise my eyebrows when people say, oh, he was acting like the Riddler. I think there's that moment when he does that speech and he kind of goes, or something like that, and people think, oh, that's the Riddler. I don't think he's acting like the Riddler. I think he gives us an outstanding performance, and I think the whole idea of the manipulation of Batman and Superman is brilliant. It absolutely works. I personally think that he's a great version of live-action Lex Luthor, but he will never be celebrated by many hardcore Superman fans. Because like every other version of these DC iconic characters in the Snyderverse, Zack gives you his own version of these characters. He's not copying and pasting them. And it's important to understand that. This wasn't a film meant for the general audience. This is a cult classic. There's no question about that. It was sold to the wrong audience. This is where the discourse came from. The discourse isn't the fans' fault. It's the studio's greed. But if you wanted to chase Marvel Studios, why did you have Zack Snyder doing this in the first place? It doesn't compute. It's mystifying, and it just shows you their clown-like behaviour. But if we forget the studio and focus on the movie, I mean, I have a lot of favourite scenes in CBM history. I mean, there's No Man's Land in Wonder Woman that Zack did direct and create, by the way. Let's not get it twisted. Let's not give the credit to Patty Jenkins, because that would be a lie. So there's No Man's Land, there's Superman flying after the missiles in Superman the movie. That still looks peak VFX even today. And that was a movie without any CGI. Amazing. You know, and then one of my favourite scenes ever. There's two scenes that I like visually. There's two sequences in BVS that I really, really adore. And one of them is obviously the Nightmare Future shot in IMAX. And it's fucking beautiful. And let me be clear. You have to be a freaking imbecile not to understand what's going on in this nightmare sequence. Right? People were complaining that this was out of context. This was foreshadowing. This was a flash forward. This was part of the Flash trying to flash to the past to find Batman, Bruce Wayne, to warn him about what's going to happen. So basically, I believe that enabled Bruce Wayne to have this flash, this nightmare, kind of about what a potential future could be. I think this is fucking a brilliant idea from Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio, this whole nightmare future thing. I think it's brilliant. It's literally a little bit like Injustice as well. That's why I've said in past videos on here, and when I've spoken on Twitter about this, they should have really tried to attract the Injustice gamers into this movie franchise. As I say, the reason there's discourse with the Snyderverse isn't the fans' fault. It was the way it was sold by the studio. It's absolutely their fault. For me, this film is a masterpiece. When I saw this film, I felt this was the next Dark Knight. I thought it was going to be lauded. I've said this before, and I always say after I said that, oh, I know you're going to laugh at me. But when I came out that movie theatre, I never thought that the reviews would be so cruel and biting and mean. And it's ironic that exactly the same movie, Captain America Civil War, gets lauded by critics and reviewers. And I'm sure Kevin Feige would never have stolen somebody else's idea, but I'm alleging he did. And hey, and by the way, Marvel and Kevin, if you do sue me, I can't afford to pay you anyway. So go for it, do what you fucking want. That's my belief. You're crumbling anyway, which is good. It's called karma for what you did to Zack Snyder. Because make no mistake, the hate for this movie also came from Disney and Marvel Studios. I believe they were planting bots online as well. Kevin Feige was very intimidated by Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice. And let's get something else clear. That title wasn't Zack Snyder's or Chris Terrio's idea. It's a title, as I say, to attract the WWF Raw SummerSlam audience. That's what it is. It's a WrestleMania kind of marketing ploy, if you ask me. It's Superman versus Batman in the left corner. It's Superman. He comes from Krypton. Don't give him no kryptonite. And then there's Batman flashing that batarang around. Basically, that's what the fucking marketing was. Who will fucking win? They were selling this movie as a fucking wrestling match. No matter, no wonder the wrong people went to see this movie. And we had that huge drop-off. I believe, as I said earlier, if you market it properly, you may not make as much money in the opening, but you'll have a solid box office and a good, solid, reasonable reaction to it. But WB didn't want a nice, solid, auteur movie. They wanted $2 billion at the global box office. Then you should have gone a different direction from Man of Steel. You didn't, because Christopher Nolan did so well with the Dark Knight trilogy and he was lauded. You thought, yeah, add his name to it. People will put their butts on the seats. But you misunderstood Christopher Nolan. He's an auteur. He went and brought someone in, understandably, who's an auteur and has a good working professional relationship with his wife, like Chris. Chris went and brought himself in. Basically, Zack Snyder is Christopher Nolan, just with more ability in VFX and the kind of visuals he puts on board, because Zack has been to art school. He's been to film school. Christopher Nolan didn't do any of that. And it just shows you what a brilliant director Nolan is, because he hasn't been trained to be such a brilliant director. So, and Chris was very honest. I can't make a Man of Steel or a Batman versus Superman film, but Zack Snyder can. He has the ability. So ultimately, if Batman versus Superman is marketed as a smaller movie, like the Batman was, or the Joker was, which is the DC movies WB are the best at. They're the ones that get more critical acclaim. Do we want Shazam, or do we want the Joker? Do we want the Dark Knight? I think we can have both things. That's what they're trying to do with James Gunn. Give us both things, the auteur side and this kind of James Gunn universe, like for kids and families and for, the MCU audience. And I get it, but sometimes in life, you can't have your cake and eat it. And if you had to choose, what would you choose? The auteur DC, like the Joker and the Batman universes, or the Shazam universe? I think we all know what we would choose. And it's interesting because WB still don't understand why Aquaman made $1 billion. I'll tell you why. It was epic. People loved Jason Momoa in Justice League. Shit movie, should never have happened. But he was one of the winners from that movie. That's why people came in to watch his movie. It was epic. The music was brilliant. The visuals were grandiose. What did Walter Hamada do after that? Make a small movie in Shazam. Then make an even smaller movie. Then allow Patty Jenkins to make a shit Wonder Woman movie. They never understood what they had with Aquaman. So anyway, back to BVS. So this film, as I say, is a Superman movie. Batman's the villain. And in the end, Batman has to learn to love again, to be a hero again. And Superman teaches him this during the fight they're having. Batman is about to confirm he's the villain of this film by murdering Superman with the kryptonite spear. It's only when he realizes, and here's the name Martha, he stops. And in my mind, he doesn't even know what Superman's chatting about here. Maybe Martha's still alive somehow. Bruce is just confused. He doesn't know what's going on here. So this is why they stop fighting. Then then Lois says it's his mother's name. And, again, you have to be an imbecile to make fun of this moment and not understand this moment. Basically, he sees Clark as a human being with a mother, like he had, right? All of a sudden, he sees a man and not an alien, not a monster, not a creature. And then Clark's able to tell him what Lex was doing, why, he was there in the first place. Then they join forces. And all of a sudden, we see the beginning of this beautiful friendship. Because in the comics, Batman and Superman are antagonistic to each other sometimes. Batman is definitely mistrustful of Superman in the animation and in the comics sometimes. But there is a beautiful friendship there. And it's I suppose it would be like, if you believe in that type of thing, in Jesus Christ and an average vagrant on the streets becoming friends. It's a God and a human being becoming friends. So it's actually a very, very beautiful story. And I think the way Snyder sets it up as having Batman as this bitter and twisted fallen hero who becomes a villain and is inspired by Superman to become a hero again, I think it's a beautiful take and I really like it. And what I love about it's the way Superman inspires Bruce. He's not virtue signaling. He's not making big speeches. Because in life, it's our actions that inspire people, not our words. Words can inspire. Of course they can. A lot of, things I've seen on television and film have inspired me to become the person I am today. I mean, growing up, seeing all the great fictional heroes, I wanted to be a hero. I don't think I've ever become a hero, but I still hope one day to do one heroic act to make me feel like I've done something to help another person because of all the heroes I've looked up to in film and television. So, you know, it is an inspiration, and that's what happens in this movie. Batman vs. Superman, for me, is a 3-hour masterpiece. No, it is not the MCU. It's not made in a traditional way. This movie is made in Zack Snyder's way. Basically, as this movie is being marketed, everyone's screaming at Snyder, you need to make DC like Marvel, and Snyder releases Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice and puts the finger up. Quite right too. And what happens here is there is a big difference from the theatrical cut and the Ultimate Edition. There's no question about that. The Ultimate Edition adds another half an hour, and this explains quite a few things that weren't explained. And unfortunately, there are elements within, you know, audiences and consumers that need to be spoon-fed about things, which is a shame, but I think it was absolutely wrong by the studio to cut the half an hour. But this was just the beginning of their interference. You know, we saw what they did with David's Suicide Squad, with Zack's Justice League movie, and, you know, they went to the depths of removing Zack and doing Justice League. But the truth of the matter is, we talk about Zack's 5-movie arc, but Zack was planning something bigger than that, a franchise bigger than that. He had a director earmarked to do a Cyborg movie and a Flash movie. You know, there was other movies within this universe that were going to happen. We got the Wonder Woman movie, so we were going to, there was the whole David Goyer writing and directing a Green Lantern movie as well. I don't think that was from Zack's side of things. I think that maybe from Jeff Johns' side of things. I'm not sure. But Zack was definitely planning to bring someone in to do a Flash movie and a Cyborg movie. Now, I'm not sure if these movies were prior to his Justice League movies. In between his Justice League movies, it would have been very, very interesting. But Zack had a lot of plans, kind of, as well as the Justice League movies, like prior to the Justice League movies and after the Justice League movies. And it's a great story. If you look at Batman's story in BVS and how Zack envisioned Batman's final chapter, he starts off as a villain, then sacrifices himself as a hero in Justice League 3. Imagine that. That's kind of the world building and the storytelling that Zack Snyder was aiming for in his Snyderverse. That's a beautiful arc for Superman, an older, grizzled Superman that starts his older journey bitter, twisted, and a villain who's torturing criminals to someone who sacrifices his life to save everyone else. And if we just focus on BVS as well, what is it about Superman's sacrifice that inspires Bruce to become a better person, to become the person he used to be and form the Justice League? Because it's that moment where Superman says, it's like people say, why didn't Superman just allow Wonder Woman to grab the kryptonite and fight Doomsday? Because she's going to die. She's going to die. Yes, the kryptonite can't hurt her. But what you're saying is, why doesn't Superman let somebody else die? Because Superman believes this is down to him. Basically, the creature is of Kryptonian origin. So if he didn't come, if he didn't come to Earth, then the technology wouldn't have been there for Lex to create Doomsday. So Clark feels very responsible. So what happens here, and this is a great lesson for kids, by the way, is to take responsibility. It's not really Clark's fault. You know, he didn't decide to come to Earth, but he feels responsible. So he takes responsibility. And that is how, you know, Bruce Wayne is inspired at the end. And this is what we get in the Justice League movie by Zack. He's trying to make up for the treatment of how he treated Superman in Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice. So it really is a very unique movie, a very special movie. If you haven't seen this movie, I'd give it a chance if I were you. Watch the Ultimate Edition in IMAX if you can. There's an IMAX copy now on 4K you can purchase. But yeah, It's unique. It's not made like other comic book movies, but it's a very special movie, and it catalogues the talent of Zack Snyder. This has been Sunday's edition of the DC Universe Daily with me, Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wife. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection, and I'll see you again in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.